Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hi guys, it's Barbara Heidenreich. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Kordowski, all about training Harris hawks for falconry. Now, if you listened to part 1, you know we got pretty deep, and guess what? Part 2 gets even deeper. We go all over the place talking about training marine mammals and talking about science and behavior analysis and talking about training groups of animals. So you'll definitely want to get into this. Stick around for the end because I answer one of your questions, and I also have a special deal for you. So you definitely want to hang on till the very end. So let's get into the interview. When you were working in zoological parks, you also flew birds for educational presentations. What do you think is the difference between doing that kind of training and then training for falconry?
That's a really interesting question because I've had some really tremendous experiences with flying presentations and flying presentations in incredible venues. All the things that I've been talking about, I did the same. What I did at work and what I did at home, I would look at the good parts of each one of those, and that's what I incorporated. I never looked at it being different other than maybe some particular restrictions on getting animals out of an environment like that. I always looked at the food. I always looked at the fact that if you're focusing your attention on food, then your attention's not on me, so we're not together. Years ago, we decided over a Thanksgiving weekend that we were going to stop wearing side buckets with our sea lions in shows. And the reason why is because when you got low on your food in your bucket, the sea lions would look into the bucket to see how much you had left, and they would make a decision on whether they wanted to stay with you or not. And our goal at that time, as the industry was evolving, one of the focuses we had was about developing relationships, and it was about making sure the animal was totally focused on you and not the food. We started to do shows. We would plant food all over the environment that wasn't visible. The animal would do whatever behavior it was that we were asking for, and they were looking to us to what was going to happen next versus my hand going in a bucket. Well, the same thing was incorporated. I didn't change just because it was a bird. I didn't change that because I was working a killer whale or working a bird. That same concept came up, is that one of the greatest discoveries I think about what we did when we did that was realizing how much we were just a walking side bucket and we weren't this individual that's trying to build a relationship with you. So with any of the birds we interacted with, and a lot of the birds that, the free-flighted birds we had Harris hawks, but we also had African fish eagles, was the fact that the predictability of having food, there was a chance that if I put my glove up, if I was calling them, back and there was no food visible, but there was a possibility there was food in it. So again, it went back to they were making a decision based on the fact that there may not be, but maybe the next experience would have that opportunity versus I see the food and I'm making a decision whether I want to come back to that food. Is that tidbit too small? Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be a different type of food? I don't want the birds to be thinking about what that food is. I want them to be thinking about what's the next experience that that trainer would be able to make that environment reinforcing. So when you talk about flying the birds, I'm going to talk a little bit specific about the African fish eagles because I think it was pretty unique. We actually imported 9 African fish eagles from Africa, and we split them between the parks. At the time, I already had a few years under my belt with falconry because that's how it started. SeaWorld asked me to get my falconry license to do some work for a new show we were putting in. Nothing to do with eagles at that point. We got the African fish eagles in, and because I'd already picked up on what I could use from the marine mammal world and incorporate it into the falconry world, when we got these eagles, it was just immediate. And it was really about helping the other trainers understand that concept, and all of us together, all of us uniformly doing it the same way. Whether we agreed with all the stuff that we were doing or not, it didn't matter because it's kind of like speaking English and speaking Spanish. If you walk in a room, you don't understand Spanish and somebody starts speaking, you get lost. So that concept went into how we were going to interact with the eagles. We did some incredible stuff, some incredible free flights with it. We had multiple animals. That was another thing I thought that was very important. A lot of shows that I went to and had observed would had one bird only doing one part, and they never had a backup. So that bird never had a break. If you made a mistake, whether the bird was fed up or the fed wasn't too hungry or whatever it was, or the bird was having a bad day, so to speak, you couldn't put the bird up and use another bird. So in these environments, people were forced, I could say it that way, to use that bird when the bird wasn't ready to participate. So to me, that was a no-no right off the bat. And it was also something that in the marine mammal world, we always had enough animals, whether it was a killer whale or sea lion or an otter or whatever, that we could make a decision on who was going to participate in a show, not that we had to use you. If we did and we didn't like what we want, we could trade you out. So we had backup eagles, and we trained all the eagles how to fly in the Shamu show. In the very beginning of the show, we had a release box top of the building. We'd have a float. It was a lure that was looking like a fish out in the middle of the pool. The birds would come from the release box. They would fly down, swoop down in the middle of the killer whale pool. Okay, this is the big 6 million gallon pool. They would swoop down and they would grab it and they would take it to B box. Now this is what we did, which worked out great. Is as that bird came down to grab that and was flying off, we had the killer whales coming out doing a fast swim right by them at the same time. So you have right on the butts of these eagles, killer whales coming out, and the birds would fly up to the other box. And we would do that every show. But we had multiple eagles trained to do the same thing, so we could use it to make it the most consistent it would be. And we weren't forcing the birds to do it because we had to for the show. We could do it because it was the best thing for the animal. And that was then translated over. We also flew these same African fish eagles for the opening ceremonies for the Daytona 500. So now you got 200,000 people in an audience. You're in the middle of this. You're releasing this bird, and this bird is soaring around and coming down to us in the middle of the center of the raceway with all these people during the Star-Spangled Banner. We had to go through a lot of desensitization. We spent a lot of time going out to the racetrack while they were doing the trials so these birds could hear the engines on these vehicles. And we would then take them out onto the middle of the field and fly them with all this stuff going on. We'd go out and have lunch, and we would sit with the eagles and have them be able to understand what was going on in the environment. So again, if you listen to that story, and then you've listened to the story that I was talking about that we did just yesterday, there's a tremendous amount of similarities in what we did because what we found worked, what we found was successful. I think multiple birds are exciting. And I mentioned we have a third bird. He's a young male. He's from the wild. We trapped him from the wild. And he's been a bird that as we're introducing, he flies with the female really well, doesn't interact well with our male, and we're approximating that process. But in the meantime, while I have these other two birds resting, what reinforces us is getting out and training this new bird, and then we're putting him back, and then we're flying the other two birds. So again, it's not working the way we want. We can still not have to sit and have this forced issue where we have to use these animals. So from my marine mammal world to the world that I'm living in today, a big thing that I found out, even in the dog world, the service dog world, backups are important. And creating those backups are super great for being able to produce the product.
I have a question about something that I sometimes see people do when they're training birds of prey. You sometimes see people using a whistle and they're blowing it really, really loudly to call birds of prey when they're out in the field. I don't see you doing that, or I haven't seen you doing that. Why is that?
My choice. I don't like whistles for the birds in the field. I do whistle. I have just a regular whistle that I use out of my mouth, just like you wore as a kid. But what I see is 3 cues at the same time for the same behavior, which is a recall. And what I've done is I've individually trained each of those. My birds will come to a glove being presented. My birds will come to their name, and my birds will come to a whistle. And the only reason for that, the whistle that I use is that because of the distances the birds are flying, it's really an opportunity I can see the birds a lot of times. You can see their heads move, which to me, that little blur that's going there is maybe they're looking my way, and then I might present my glove. But the reality is, what I've seen a lot of falconers doing is it's almost as if they think they have to do all three of the same cues for the same behavior. And on top of that, they're also adding food, whether they're using it in their right hand and wiggling it around, whether you're putting food on the glove. The reality is, to me, and what I've seen and when I've asked them to do it, I see the bird ignoring the whistles. I see them ignoring all that stuff, because what ends up happening a lot of times is the falconers get nervous. They're thinking the bird's going to fly off. So what they do is they go to what their last result might be, which is, I'm going to go ahead and present that food out there, even though I'm still using my whistle. I'm still trying to call them. I've still got my glove up. I'm still presenting food, because it's more of the fact that I'm going to lose my bird and I have to do everything I can to do it. And also, they don't really spend the time to distinguish whether the bird is responding just to the glove or the bird is responding just to the whistle. They just think it all has to be put together, and it doesn't. And, I like to fly, when I'm training the birds, I like to fly them what I call blind, where they cannot see me presenting anything with my body. I'm hiding behind a barrier of sorts, and I'm using a whistle or their name to call them, and it's their job to find me. And when they come around, there might be the glove sitting up, which would be the way, or a pole might be sitting up to be able to come to that, because that way it helps me identify whether they are actually doing it or not. And I took it a step further with targeting. This has always been a pet peeve of mine in the industry, and that is, everybody at times thinks that the bird's responding to the bridge, the marker, whether it's whatever it might be. And I decided I was going to train my hawks to a target, and I wanted the birds to go to the target. I wanted to use a clicker, and I wanted them to use that clicker as a release from touching the target and come to me for their food. And I mean, in those exact steps, they're coming, they touch it, I mark. I'm not removing the target, because a lot of times the removal of the target is the marker. So I'll leave the target there, I mark it, they leave, and then they come over to me. That tells me they understand that marker that I'm using, in that case the clicker, they are definitely hearing the clicker means stop whatever I'm doing and coming over to me. It's not the release of the target. I mean, years ago we had a sea line, a behavior we had where we'd have the sea line, and it would slide down and it would hang its rear flippers on the deck, and you stomp your foot as the marker, they come back up. Well, when you trained it, what ended up happening is you had a target down there, so when they slid down, they touched the target. But what we found is that when you marked it with your foot, at the same time you did that as a human, you would move the target out at the same time. And what we discovered is that the removal of the target was the marker, not the stomping of the foot that we wanted to have. That taught me at that point years ago that I needed to be very aware of what it was my marker was that I was using, because it might be different than what the animal thinks the marker is.
That was actually one of my questions, if you ever used a bridging stimulus intentionally with your birds of prey out in the field. But it sounds like the training the target thing was something you were doing kind of as an experiment with the clicker.
I just wanted to, I think it's just kind of fun as enrichment. This is during the molt. I'd bring them out during the molt, and I'd be doing something a little bit different. I just thought it was really fun to have them. I'd throw the target somewhere, they go down to a different location, touch it, and they come back up. And I taught them to rotate right or left with target and stuff like that. I just thought it was just kind of fun because it was enriching. And every time you step up to an animal, you're obviously training. So why not do this? And here's the thing I found that was really most interesting about it is it didn't matter what their weight was, because I was doing it in their molt when they're really their heaviest. They were interacting with it like it was going after prey. So the reality was at that point, I was also seeing that teaching that and using that different behavior that had nothing to do with hunting and nothing to do with those animals was really enriching for them. So it was like, I want to do this because at this time of the year, you're not necessarily getting out a lot. You're blowing out your feathers, but there's something else you could still do with them. I've got markers that I use when I'm out in the field as well. And basically their name might be something, or the presentation of the glove. So those are two markers that are used. The glove doesn't come up. I've just got the glove. I'm kind of randomly doing it, but I might present the glove. And again, my body is showing a specific. that's usually a marker to stop whatever you're doing and return to the glove. So that, and I can use that, and that helped translate into what we could do with the birds when we were transferring them off game. And it's interesting to note too that some of the birds realized that they were participating in the catch, but they didn't catch it. Or one bird might be more interested in it than the other one. You see the other one looking for an opportunity to break away from it. And you take advantage of those things. But you want to make sure that they're getting reinforced.
I love that you just mentioned that presenting the glove can act as a bridging stimulus. I hadn't thought about that until you just said that right now. And that is a very, very, very important point. Probably one that a lot of people don't think about.
It's very helpful. And again, it's not used in every situation. So you can, as you know, as well as I do, Barbara, is that you can have a lot of different markers. You don't have to have one marker. Everybody thinks you have to have one thing. It's like clicker training. Clicker training is more of a concept than it is the actual marker itself, because you can use whatever word you want to pick. You could use, like I told you before about I stomped my foot. The sea lions taught me a tremendous amount about how subtle you could be with your cues and your markers. Because what we would do in our shows is we would incorporate the markers into our dialogue, and we would train it so that the animals would release from the behavior by a word that was in the sentence, in the dialogue that we were saying. So it looked as if the animal was doing whatever it was on its own, and the cues were so subtle. We might snap your fingers and they would drop to the ground and they would lay out, but you could have your hands wherever and you could snap it. The audience couldn't hear the snap. They didn't see me snap it, but the animal did, and they could respond to it. Then I could say, okay, or good, or I could make a movement or whatever I wanted to do as a marker in that situation. And that taught me a lot in the sense that it's really about whatever you teach, you want it to be a marker. And then what happens is as you train that behavior, you can put whatever marker in you want to be able to do it. It doesn't have to be the same thing. And I think because, we see a lot in a lot of the modern training, especially in the clicker training side of things, is there's a big focus on this clicking sound that we have to have that in order to tell them. Now, we haven't even touched on the fact that you have approximated behavior and maintenance behavior. And then what do you do with those two things? When you're shaping behavior, you want to have something that's real distinctive and repetitive so that you don't lose the concentration of the animal you're working with in the approximated process. But once that behavior is completed, you can transfer that marker to whatever you want in order to maintain that behavior. And because those two things are happening, I always see people that keep training, when the reality is the behavior is already trained. You just haven't transferred either to a cue or a marker that you want to have done. So there's a distinguished difference between the both of those. And years ago, that's something that I learned that was super valuable by doing thousands of shows that was super successful and allowed us an opportunity to actually elude the audience with what was going on and give this real anthropomorphic impression from this sea lion or walrus or otter that was actually happening. We haven't talked about this, but I think it's a lot, but it's super important, is your basics. I believe that the basics of what it is that you do cannot be compromised, because the one thing that happens is when you've had successes and all of a sudden you started to create behavior and you don't know why, you get even deeper and deeper. And when all else fails, go back to basics. Because what ends up happening is when you go back to the basics, in today's world, because of the computer, I always say reboot. So if your computer's not working and you're kind of to wit's end of what to do, you reboot your computer and then you can go back to whatever you're doing. I believe the same thing is true of animal training. When you have overthought something so much and you've gotten yourself in a pickle and you can't figure out why things are happening, you left something out somewhere, or you have not added something that should have been added, or you just assumed it was supposed to be okay. But when you reboot and you start over again and you go through those basics and you established it, 99.9% you found your error. Or I always looked at it as this animal's never seen a trainer before and has no idea, even if it's been in training for years, that it's never, ever, seen anybody. And you go back to the beginning and you start to, you obviously can go through the process quite quickly, but along the way, you're going to find out what has lacked in your process by going back and having the concept in your head that this is a new animal. This is how I would deal with this new animal. This is what I would work. It might be your relationship. It might be your marker. It might be that you're not spending enough time with different reinforcers. It allows you an opportunity to find out those things. And I do the same thing with the animals I have. Pierce, our male, for years I've flown him with our female. And just assumed that that was going to be okay, that he was going to learn a lot and participate a lot. And this last year, my wife was like, you know what we're going to do is, I think, let's just work Pierce by himself. Let's just go through this whole world and assume that he's never worked with another bird and never. And she spent the time and invested a lot of time in spending time manning in relationship. She spent a lot of time on separately flying him. And by gollies, was that not the trick going back to the beginning? He has been, I'm so proud of this. This last couple of days, we were out, he caught a lot of bunnies, 11 bunnies on his own. Super successful. And not only that, but a participant in multiple catches from multiple other birds and not giving up. And then being really involved in what we were doing. And it was simply the fact that my wife went back to the beginning and said, we missed something. There was something we just haven't done. And what we didn't do is we did not spend enough time with him one-on-one. We just assumed that it was okay because he would occasionally catch and do stuff with the other bird, and we thought that was okay. It wasn't enough. But that told us that we also will take the birds out, even though we fly them together, we also fly them separately. So that we can take a look and make sure we're not missing something, because that goes back to working with group animals. A lot of times we just assume that the whole group knows what's going. A lot of times you have a follower back there, and the follower really doesn't have a clue what's going on. And you test that, and you find that the animal doesn't know anything, and that's why you're having problems. And then when you single that animal out and start working, and the animal understands that individually, all of a sudden there's a spark of oh my God, that's what we've been doing the whole time. I just been following the butt of this one animal going into this, into the back, All of a sudden, you realize that it's because I have a follower and not a learner. And when you have a follower and a learner, that's when you get all that confusion. And that's when you start finding out that it's really not the fault of the animal. It's just that I haven't made that animal a learner. What I did is I made the animal a follower. So I think that goes back to basics. And I think that you with all the stuff, obviously shaping behavior is super sexy, and we all want to do it. A lot of people have a more difficult time in maintaining behavior because it's not as sexy, but that's the base. That's the base for everything that happens. That's the base for your communication. It's the base to make sure you're on what you need to do. That's why I weigh the birds every day, even though there's such an adjustment with what we do because of the relationships that we've built. I do it because of health. I want to make sure that I have healthy birds. I don't want to have a bird that's too hungry. If I'm flying a bird as much as we're flying, you know how much energy they're burning? So during that time, when I'm trading off, they're getting quite a bit of tidbits along the way. And at the end of the day, they might be slower. They're still participating, but not as active as they were earlier. And I wait at the end of the day and I go, God, I got to give this bird some food, because overnight they're going to metabolize everything they have. They're going to be too light. So you really have to pay attention to what's going on, but it all comes back to basics. Thank you for asking the questions. One of the things as trainers that we don't realize is, and you find this out a long time ago, but we know more and remember more when somebody takes the file cabinets in the back of your head and blows off the dust and opens them up and asks you questions. Because as we're having these conversations, I'm thinking about all the experiences I've had over the 45 years that has me where I'm at today. But the one thing that isn't finished is that there's still so much more to learn. You never learn everything. What you do is you establish your techniques, your style, your bases on how you do things, and you move forward. You watch other people, and people who do awesome jobs, you pick up a little bit from them that might help with what you're doing, but it's a learning process. And I think that, to me, that turns me on. That's really some of the exciting things. It's like when you and I go and have attended the Arts and Science conference quite a bit. And you take this one tiny little subject that you just assumed, and it's in this big pile of stuff. It could be It could be a DRA as an example. And we just talk about DRA, and that's all we talk about. It's such a small little piece of the puzzle of all the tools that build the building blocks to everything else you do. But sometimes you don't realize how important it can be in that situation and why it should be used. And sometimes we muddle it and put it all together, and we're not using the tools as we should be or could be, and we need to break it down. And I think that as we get more and more into talking about training over time, it's really great to analyze those little pieces, because those little pieces are an important element that might help in something you're doing in the future. So as you brush off of the dust on the back of my file cabinet, in the back of my brain, I just remember how much I learned going through a time in the industry when we were developing what we're doing today. And I think that, that's the thing I think a lot of people miss, is that somebody had to do it first. We did a lot of firsts. We did a lot of the wrong stuff in order to find out the good stuff. And we've been able to push it forward. And I feel really lucky that I was a part of that, because what it did for me is it allowed me to be where I am today, and to be just as thrilled and just as excited about interacting and taking my abilities to recognize behavior and work with behavior to be able to get myself to that ultimate point. And I can't tell you how many times you have that euphoric moment that it all works together, where you're not able to physically, talk to an animal and be able to translate, but you know from what's happening at that moment that you're so much on the same page together, that you've connected with an animal, that it's the most wonderful feeling you can ever have. And I can't, and that's why I keep doing it, and will always do it until, I can't walk anymore. I'll get my Moon Rover wheelchair out there and take my birds out and still fly with them, because it's just too exciting.
Well, and I hope I get to go out in the field with you before both of us are in those Moonwalker wheelchairs, so I can experience it with you.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome to do it. When we had April and I went out and we flew together, it was remarkable. She was a great student, and because she was already involved in behaviors, and also she had a lot of really nice things to say about you and the time that you two guys have spent together, that helped her move quicker. When you're in the field and you're working two birds, if you have one bird that's active and the other bird wants to sit back, you keep going with the active bird. That other bird, I'm not worried about losing the bird, but he's losing his opportunity. I'm going to move on. And it was really fun to watch how she recognized that and could see that happening, and how all of a sudden you get a flight happening, and this flight would happen with the bird. All of a sudden that bird in the back's going, hey, I better not miss out. I better get involved. So you're creating those moments that basically says, you just missed out, buddy. I have one bell I put on each of the birds that have a different frequency. And the reason why I do that is because I want to listen to a couple of things from that. One is I can tell from the way that the birds take off from a location or from my T-pole, whether they're moving from one location to the next just to reposition themselves, or whether they're off on a flight. And I've recognized that the other birds recognize the exact same thing. They can tell whether the bird's just moving to a location or whether that bird's actually on a flight. And I don't have to be looking at them. I can just listen to what's going on. And because of that, it goes back to they're communicating to me, but then they're also communicating to the other animals. So we're all on the same page with the communication. And we're not human, two humans. We're humans. And for her to be able to see that, I thought was pretty wonderful, because you could see that we were involved in that moment. And it goes back to the fact that they're doing it in such a free environment. They're wanting to be with us. They want that. And people go, well, you restrain them, you put them on a perch somewhere. And you do for different reasons at different times, but that has nothing to do. If your bird's flying around, and that bird wants to be with you the whole time.
For 8 hours.
What else can you ask for? How many people can take their dogs out for a walk and not have their dogs stay with them? Or they're not paying attention to what it is that they're doing. And I see that all the time. And I'm doing that with hawks. And these birds, they're not domesticated. We have this assumption that dogs should do it. But if you invest the time like you would with the birds, you'd have the same thing. So it's not that the bird is better and the dog is different or whatever. It's really about the trainer investing the time in what it is that they want and creating a learner that's going to be able to produce the behaviors they're looking for. I always really enjoy taking people out to fly the birds, and my birds don't mind being with other people because they've been around it and they look at it as help. Somebody's going to carry a T-pole or somebody's going to flush for me. So, hey, I'm fine. As long as you understand what my language is, I'm good with you. And I'm the one that's going to teach you what the language is, and then we're going to go out. But because we do that, and you go out and you see that, my wife and I, Tamara, we always get a big kick when we take people out in the field. We may not catch anything, but the reality is the people are usually amazed on how well the birds follow along with us, how well the birds are attentive to us in the fields. And that just doesn't happen. I mean, you invest the time into doing it, but, we create that. If I want, I already know that the bird's going to go to the highest location. So if I zigzag myself through a field to get to where I want to go by using the high purchase, I know my bird's going to follow along with me. Those are things that you work together with your birds when you're out in the field. And I take it for granted because we just do it normally now. That's just kind of the normal way we're doing. We're strategically walking through a field. But to have somebody that's not used to seeing that go out and actually witness it, I get to see it through their eyes. What a remarkable experience is to be out with those animals at a different level. And I say different level because it's not based on the food. It's based on the relationship that you've built through those trusting experiences.
So can you explain who April is and what you will be doing with April coming up soon?
Yes, April Becker is part of the faculty in the behavioral analysis group at the University of North Texas. And just like you and I, April and I over the years have had conversations about falconry. She's always been interested in it. In fact, when she worked with you and had opportunity, she's always had an interest in falconry. And at the conferences over the years, we've had conversations, and we finally are able to collaborate on a paper or a presentation, basically, that's talking about what we're learning from working together with these hawks. You can have conversations just like we're having right now, and you can hear my stories, you can hear my thoughts and stuff like that. But there's something different about actually getting out there and participating in it to actually see it. So April and I have met up a couple of times so that she could actually witness it and participate and be a participant in the experience. And we've gone out a couple of times. One time we went out, and it was remarkable. And I could tell her enthusiasm, because when you're walking, I mean, literally, we're walking irregular terrain, and everything in the fields attack you. All these have different, thorns and choyas or these cactus that are jumping out at you. Her enthusiasm, she was just walking, and she was hitting the brush, and she was paying attention to where everybody's going. And if we caught something, she was right there to assist and how she needed to assist. She just had the most incredible experience, but I witnessed her enthusiasm, her questions, the interactions that she's having, the fact that the birds that she doesn't know a thing about were interacting with her because we're all part of the cast. Even though I say the two birds are a cast, I look at it as the humans and the birds together are the cast. And she was well into the cast. She could easily put a pole down to help the birds back up, and the birds would immediately pop up, or she knew how to get to the location. I mean, it was nice and exciting for me to be able to see falconry through another person's eyes, because it was really my eyes that she was seeing with. It helps to reinforce in my mind that what it is that I'm doing is really workable, but it's an amazing opportunity. I'm just so lucky to have been a part of all those things all those years, and to be able to share it with somebody else, especially at the level that she got to experience it at. I took from the wolf.
Oh, Ken McCord?
He's Ken McCord. I took him out last year, and we didn't catch anything. We did get one chase. We took him out. He was amazed what was going on. And it wasn't, his experience wasn't 99% as much as what April got to experience with those guys. So, the experience level and what you actually get to do as you get more involved in it is spectacular. And I hope that people get a chance to know more about falconry and learn more about falconry. But at the same time, don't take my hunting locations. Those are very valuable. I do have some nice birds. My wife and I have invested a lot of time in them. But one of the things that falconers are challenged with is locations to allow your birds to practice their skills. I live in central Texas. We don't have a lot of game in central Texas. We have to travel great distances to find just one or two opportunities for flights. We travel 8 hours now to locations that have a lot of game in it. I've never seen what my birds are capable of until I started traveling and giving them an opportunity to do what it is they're doing. And a lot of falconers, they're into it, but they're, because of time or because of their abilities, they don't travel to help their birds practice what it is that their skill set needs to be. And as a falconer, you need to be willing to travel to give those experiences, because you could have the greatest bird in the world, but if you're not giving them an opportunity to practice the skills they need to hunt with you and hunt with themselves or other birds, you'll never have a bird that can be to its potential. Thursday, I'm going to get up and I'm going to get in the car at 3:30 and have everybody packed up, and I'm going to travel. So I'm in the fields by 10:30 a.m. I'm going to travel through the night, avoiding the deer all over the roads, because I realize that by doing this, I get a chance to see the potential that these birds have to actually do what they were created to do, but allow me an opportunity to be a part of that experience and to be able to have birds that are super healthy, that have these super strong chests and legs and wing beats and abilities to fly the distances, and the abilities to miss something and recoup themselves and continue that until they do catch it or not, or, things you don't ever get a chance to see. And I think that location, opportunities to find locations for your birds to experience that, a huge element to what it is that I think makes you successful with your birds. I'm willing to do it. We may end up moving to closer to those locations to give ourselves more opportunities, because it is just, I'm willing to consider, moving to a different location in order for that to happen more frequently. And I will continue to do that because I'm retired and I can.
And you are truly passionate about flying hawks.
Barbara, I'm actually passionate about behavior and being, I'm a behavioral practitioner. Okay. I'm a behavioral practitioner. I'm not a behavioral analyst, but I do like to know the knowledge, but I'm a practitioner. I always have been. And I know where my place is in doing it. I have a lot more that I want to learn, but I have 3 dogs. I have 2 macaws. I have tortoise. Everybody gets trained. Everybody gets enrichment. My practice doesn't change. And with working, I've worked 125 different species, actually trained 125 different species. And because of that, and because of my approach to it, and that doesn't change. My base is my base. I get a chance to experience the way that they interact. Herd animals, my God, they're so much different than predators, and how that they act. But it's super interesting to know that behavior, because I work with predators, but because I work with predators, it helps me to better understand the prey animals. So you learn a lot about behavior in what it is you do. And I am such a sponge to wanting to learn what that is. I want to know the analytical side of it. I want to know because I'm very interested in that. I want to kind of know it. But the thrill is in the practitioning.
I am right there with you.
And I know you are, Barbara.
It's a Zen moment, isn't it? When you're out there training, the whole world disappears, and to me, I think of it as like, it's almost like meditative. Even though you may be very active in the moment, the whole world just blurs out and you disappear, because you're just so in that moment and engaged and having that interaction with that animal and applying all those things, like you said, all those skill sets that you've learned about and all the science that's behind it. And you're thinking about the science somewhere in the back there too, and analyzing it to death afterwards. But in the moment, it's all just coming out your hands. And that's what I love. I love that moment.
As the practitioners, that's what I think is intrinsically reinforcing for us, is to create that moment or moments that allow that to happen. I used to play a lot of golf. I picked up golf because it was different than training. Training was this kind of free-formed element of what it is you're doing and throwing all these things together. And golf was really linear. And I liked the 2 different things. It was really healthy for me. But the one thing I forgot about is that golf courses are usually placed in some beautiful locations. And what I had to teach myself to do in golf is I got so involved in the game that I forgot about the surroundings and how beautiful it was. And because of that, when I'm out with my birds in the wild and I'm flying them, I will always take the moments just to take the breath in and to see how spectacular it is. I get goosebumps. We're flying on 100,000 acres. 100,000 acres, okay? No fences, nobody coming up saying you can't fly here. It's all government land. I can go wherever I want. Whatever road I travel down, I can stop my car and get out and fly. But it's so beautiful, just so beautiful out there that it's the moments with the animals, but the animals are giving me the moments to be free. You know, if my phone rings, I hate it. You know, I don't know why sometimes I keep it on other than I have it on. And I'm so involved in the moment that I think that I get myself to a place also. My animals take me to a place that allow me to disappear from everything that's going on and forget everything, because you're in that moment. You're out there together. You're, again, like we've talked about, we're trying to make sure we're spending the time behaviorally to make sure we're making the right decisions, but we're both out with the same purpose and we're both kind of enjoying it. And that's why I think when we take those breaks and the birds are sitting up on the car or whatever like that, and they're just kind of enjoying the moment, I almost think at times they're doing the same thing, because I've had them. I'm sitting on the tailgate of my car, and I've had the birds come down and land next to me while I'm just sitting there hanging out. I've got pictures of them just kind of hanging out next to me, sitting here. They could do whatever they want, and I'm looking at some photos or looking through the GoPro or whatever it is, and they're just there kind of hanging out, watching what's going on. If that doesn't tell you that they are involved in this moment and they are just as thrilled and excited, then you are basically saying that animals can't think. And I've been around them so long that animals know what's going on. But if you can connect that, you have those animals that are interested in being with you, and they have the abilities to go off to wherever they want to go, but where they want to be is with you. What does that tell you? That tells me that I'm thrilled and that I'm excited. And when they do that, you know, I might be in the middle of doing something, they're resting, they come down, they fly, and they're sitting there with me, and I'm doing this. All I think about is peripherally looking and seeing what they're doing and how they're paying attention, because I'm so mesmerized by how they are like, what are you doing? What is that? What you know, they're trying to figure out what I'm doing at the same time, which means we have become one and we're interacting together in that moment. And the wild brings it to you. I'm living as I was as a child when I would get out looking for snakes and lizards as a kid, and I get lost. And all I would be doing is looking at identifying where the potential location might be that I could go ahead and pick one up or whatever, and everything else gets blocked off. And I did that as a child, and I'm doing it again as a retired adult. It's never went away. I'm just getting a chance to doing it at a totally different level. And now I have a better understanding of why it was that I was drawn to it as a child.
Yeah, and I did that too. But I think what I like about that story too, what I was thinking about is instead of you looking for the lizards and everything, the hawk is also looking for you.
Oh, and Barbara, there's times that I decide to play little games out in the field and I'll hide somewhere. And anytime I have to giggle when you're flying the birds and maybe you're in a dense forest versus out in the desert. And your bird is right there, and the bird's watching everything you're doing while you're flushing things, and the bird's not moving up and stuff. And you go behind a bush or you go into the middle of the woods or whatever. Next second, they're finding you and they're sitting right next to you. You know, so they're exploring the moments, but they don't want to miss an opportunity that you might uncover something. You know, going back to there's all these opportunities for reinforcement as long as I'm with you and I'm participating with you. So I'll hide and I'll have them find me, and I get the biggest kick out of it because they're landing like, well, what are we doing in here? What's going on over here? What are you doing here? I'm assuming that's what they're thinking, but by gollies, if they're not there, you know? So I enjoy those moments where they're kind of like, I need to be with you, right? You're the one that's gonna, I don't know what we're gonna do, but I'm with you.
Yeah. I always said, for me, when I was a kid, I always just wanted to make friends with animals. So like if I visited a friend's house and the dog or the cat in the household wasn't very fond of people, my whole mission was I didn't care what the people were doing. They could go have their party and socialize. I was going to somehow make friends with the cat or the dog. And so I think that sort of turned into my life's work, is how can I make friends with animals? And, now it's more focused on exotic animals, but that's the whole thing. I like, just like this, I want that animal to seek out my companionship for whatever reason. In your case, maybe it has to do with hunting prey, but it evolves into more. Like you said, if you're sitting there looking at your phone and now the hawk wants to know, well, hey, what you doing? I like hanging out with you for so many reasons. It's that relationship. It all comes back to that relationship. And it's so reinforcing in so many different ways.
I'm the same way that you are with that, Barbara. I find myself, when I walk into an environment, if there's an animal, I immediately put on my behavior hat. And, every time, because I'll wait to see whether I get solicited by the animal versus me soliciting the animal. I always take a look at all the behaviors that they're doing and what's going on. And one of the things about work in the exotic side is you have opportunities to do stuff, but you don't always have as much opportunity as I've had to do with these hawks. And the reason why I say that is because there's a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
You're going to be feeding, you're going to be cleaning, you're going to be doing enrichment or whatever. But if you really calculate how much time that was in your day, it doesn't come up to that much. So you try to do as much as you can in that very limited amount of time. What I've had the opportunity to do with these birds is I can spend as much time as I want. There's no limit. It's getting dark and we're going to fly back to the car. I'm just tired or whatever. What that does is it tells me what's possible. And we haven't touched on temperament. We haven't touched on any of those areas. Those are some of the limits you have in a zoological environment, especially if you're dealing with SSP animals, in the sense that you get animals, and it doesn't matter what the temperament is. It's all about breeding, and it really doesn't. It's about reproducing that species, and not necessarily about the temperament and being able to engage at a level you would like to engage at. Sometimes when we would get animals, I'd go out and get animals for our ambassador program, and you were limited to one animal. We get an anteater, we're limited to the one anteater. We're excited about getting that anteater, but you couldn't select the temperament of that animal. So you had to work with whatever you got. In my case, two different personalities and temperaments with the birds that I have, but I can choose those things, which allows me an opportunity to try to pick at that peak, and I can look for my challenges. I'm not forced into my challenge. I can select my challenge. And I think that's important to know, because somebody could come out and watch what I'm doing, and this is spectacular. I want to do this all the birds I'm working with at work. Well, the reality is you don't have the same temperament as what I've been able to work with, or time invested to be able to do that. Not that they may not be capable of getting there over a long period of time, but it may not be there. And that was another big difference between working in the oceanarium and doing shows with the animals that I dealt with versus working at the zoo. And the reason why is because I did shows, the animals interacted with us, 8 hours a day or longer. They work with multiple people. They had a repertoire of multiple behaviors. We could spend and invest the time in the stuff that I'm doing, like with falconry right now. In the zoo environment, you don't have that same luxury to be able to do what we did in that show environment. But, like you're talking about the bird shows, we had multiple animals that could do the same thing versus one animal that only could do it and no other animals could replace us. You were kind of stuck. And that was a huge learning curve for me. And it's also something that was very frustrating to a lot of trainers that worked in those environments, because they didn't have the luxury of selecting multiple animals. They kind of knew that they were stuck with what they had, and they had to work with it the best they could. And if they made a mistake, it was pretty detrimental to its opportunity to do a show. In my case, working with multiple animals of the same species, I could select which animal would do the first show or the 10th show, and how that would work within that environment, which allowed me an opportunity to do what I've learned for falconry. Is I could invest long time. I could say, you're not doing a show today, and we're going to go and just do relationship sessions all day long and play. That's all we're going to do. Other animals don't have the luxury. I think that in bird shows in general, if you had multiple of animals in the same species, it would allow you the same opportunity. And I think that's a proven fact if you see my birds. because I have the opportunities of allowing them to take a break. I have the opportunities right now to work. I can bring them out. It doesn't mean they have to fly together. I can individually work them, and I can allow the amount of time. I mean, I know what can be done, so you can't sit there and say no, it can't be. But your restrictions on your environment and your restrictions on the area that you're invested in can put those restrictions on.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because I think a lot of times we see in zoological facilities, it's like, this is what you've got, make it work with what you've got, as opposed to saying, maybe we need to rethink what we have and our goals, and instead say, okay, this is our goal, but can we create the right collection in order to achieve our goals, as opposed to, this is our collection, make it work no matter what type of thing. And again, going back to one thing we haven't touched on too much, but because of your background working with service dogs, where you did do a lot of selecting of animals from shelters and doing temperament testing to pick the right candidates to be service dogs, you have a lot of background in that really isn't considered very much in the zoological facility when we're selecting good candidates for education programming. So that's another really good point that often isn't considered.
That topic is another topic, in a sense that the temperament testing with the dogs taught me, in all the years I've been doing this, taught me more about the selected individual and whether or not they were the right one for that job. And I think you have to look at it that way, because everybody has a purpose, but it may not be for the purpose or the job that you want them to have. I tested thousands of dogs. Very few dogs came out as fitting what would work in their temperament for being a service dog. But it didn't mean that they couldn't be a good search and rescue dog, or a good therapy dog, or just a good pet dog. And I think you have to recognize it, because a lot of times individuals want to place every animal in that same category, and they try to work really hard to make it work, which it will never work. I don't have the skill set to be a surgeon. All right. Maybe as an early kid, and if I had an interest and I wanted to keep doing it, maybe it would be right. But right now, I'm not going to be able to change to being a surgeon from being in animal behaviors. I'm working with the mind versus working with the intricacies of the body. I'm not the right person to do it. So I don't think that's a good path for me. And I think that when you're looking at the dog world, that you need to be able to select the dog for the right job. And what that taught me is that, because I was in an environment, and I didn't realize it, but we did get the chance to select we got to select the dolphins that we wanted to have that were going to be in our show program from a collective group of animals within the entire collection. You had the same opportunity to do that with sea lions and stuff like that. So I didn't realize, but at the time, we got a chance to kind of select some temperament, but we didn't really get involved in the temperament. We just went, hey, that animal seems to be engaged with us. I think I like that. But then I got into the ambassador animals. And because we wanted unique species, we had a hornbill, silver-cheeked hornbill that we got. He turned out to be a nice bird, had some quirks, but it's the only one we could come across. So it was unique. So we were trying to make it to work, but we could never probably get him to work at the level that maybe we could with one with a better temperament. We were, again, back to what you're saying, you're restricted to what it is you have, because you don't have a lot. We had anteaters, giant anteaters that we worked, and they had their limitations as well, because we didn't have the opportunity to temperament test 10 or 12 or 30 of them to see which one might fit best. We had an opportunity to pick one, and we had the money in our pocket to be able to do that. So that's what we did. And then what we did is we could only go as far as that animal could in the job we were asking it to do. And I went through that process for many, many years, not realizing that until we got into the service dogs and finding shelter dogs, that I realized how much more work needed to be invested to actually find the right animals, not just dogs, but animals, to do the job that we as humans wanted to put them into. And that's really helped me a lot with falconry, in the sense of the temperament of the birds and what my limitations are for what they are, and then making the best on what you could with them, versus I'm stuck with it. Because I've had falconers that have trapped birds, because that's, obvious our opportunities to do that, and they're struggling, and I'm like, that bird doesn't want to be a falconry bird. You need to release it. My apprentice, the first bird that he had was a kestrel, and the bird was getting chapped on his legs from the jesses. And I told him he needs to make a decision. I said, you're going to have to deal with this physical issue the whole time that you have this bird, and it may kill your bird, versus the bird's opportunity to be able to fly without those jesses and to be able to, the flight obviously helps them in a healing process. You need to make that decision because you have the opportunity, if you want, to trap any bird you want at any time. But if you decide you want to work and deal with a physical issue on an animal that you don't need to do that with, the better decision is to release that bird and find another bird that's going to work for you. You have people out there that have red tails that are struggling with the birds, or the birds will actually attack them. And they're trying to ask questions. What do I need to do? How do I need to do that? Well, the reality is you have the opportunity, because it's not a captive born bird. You can release that bird. That bird doesn't want to be a falconry bird. It doesn't want to be in that environment. Why would you want to force that? That's what going out with the service dogs and trying to find dogs from shelters help teach me is we're trying to stick a square peg in a round hole, and it's not working. Just because everybody's doing it and you see it and it's working doesn't mean that bird doesn't want to be doing it. I mean, we're all different individual personalities, and so are the animals. So pick the one that's a round peg and stick it in a round hole. Don't try to force the issue. It's hard for people to get, in the sense that it might be the first animal they've ever dealt with, and they feel like they've screwed up. But they're going to screw up more if they don't release it and try another bird. So I think we really need to spend a lot of time observing, and that's why I've tried to create an environment that I have the opportunity to do a lot of observations, to make the decisions on whether or not I'm making the right decision on what it is that, and I go back to what job it is, because it's easy to, for us humans to understand, but what job does that animal want? And if I've got it in the right place, and then make the appropriate decision from there.
Yeah, with the education animals, I sometimes pose the question about how much time do you want to try investing in this animal to train it to be a part of that education program? Because if you start weighing out how much time it's going to take to potentially get this animal participating in the program, and it may not succeed, is it worth it to you? And then, of course, there's also the question of animal welfare. If this animal is really participating in a way that looks like it's voluntary and enjoying the experience, that's the question also to ask. So in the long run, it may be that you've invested so much time into this and it's really not being that successful, whereas you could really just look at another candidate that's a better candidate and you're going to get there a lot faster. So those are always questions that I do have people look at when they're looking at investing so much time in an animal, that they're feeling that pressure that this one's got to be the one because that's the only one they've got.
That's why you're a successful consultant, I believe. You're asking that right question, because you have a lot of people that have a shingle hanging out there, and all they want to do is keep their business going. So they're going to do everything they can to get whatever they can out of that animal when the animal really doesn't deserve to be in that position. And when you're asking the right ethical question, I think, is how much time can you invest, especially in the zoological? How much can you invest? Not how much time you want to invest, because we all know the more time you invest, the more success you may have or may need. But it's really, do you have the time? You may have the energy and the enthusiasm to do it, but if you only have 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day in separate times, you're not going to get to the level you want to be at. And it's maybe a little bit better for that animal to not have to deal with that stress or potential frustration, both the animal and the person that's actually doing it. So asking that question, I think, is super valuable for your clients. And I'm really happy to hear that that's a question you ask.
Thank you.
I think that in order for this industry to continue to go in the direction, people also need to go back into some of the literature that has been out, or talk to some of the people that have been in the industry for a long time, because a lot of what it is that they're doing today and looking at as being a milestone for them has already been done, and they could actually go farther with what we have gone through by taking the information that's been assimilated through all these years. When I was with IMATA, One of the things that I was real excited about, I was the president at the time, and I got a chance to solicit the board to do, was to take all of the papers that and any information we possibly could about marine mammal training from the very beginning of IMATA in 1970s, and get it out there, because I was seeing a lot of papers that were being presented that sounded like it was the first time any of these things had happened, and they already had happened. It was the first time it happened to them. But instead of progressing forward with what it was that was actually happening in the industry, it was kind of like going back to training the same behavior again and again, when in essence, we need to move it to the next level and move it forward. And I think that the more information that the present practitioners and behaviorists and stuff know of what it was we did, instead of reinventing the wheel, they can take a look at taking that wheel, putting four of them, and getting down the road on them. And I'd like to see much more. That's why I really like to talk about it and be able to bring up some of the old stuff that we did, because I don't think people realize we experimented, because we did a lot of experimenting, because we came from the world of aversives and punishment and food deprivation. But in order to accomplish what we wanted to do with the animals, we had to get rid of those things, because we couldn't do it with those. It just doesn't work, even though it's still out there and it's still very active, and it's very active in the dog world. There's this whole split between, the positive trainer and the aversive trainer. There's a lot of common pieces to it, but they both have, some issues. It's kind of like politics. Everybody's so strong on one and the other, they don't realize that they're actually talking about a lot of the same things. They might have one or two differences that they all spend their time concentrating on, when everything else is the same. And they can take a look at those pieces and take another look at them, but they're not always doing that. And I think that I think you have to, in order to be well-rounded, you need to look at all of them, because some of the information that some of these people that are doing that may not be doing everything the way I would want to do it has some really good information that I need to open myself to. I think you and I have had that discussion before, is that the people that aren't looked at as being the greatest trainers do some things really well, and it might be just the basics. And what is it that I can learn from them? And I think that we need to look at those pieces. And I got a chance to look through a different pair of glasses years ago, because I've had the opportunity to go from one extreme to see where the new area really benefited not doing it the old way, because I could still get him to get animal to do something, but where do you want to be with that animal in that relationship? I think that there's a lot of new trainers out there that could absorb a lot of really good information by looking back and finding out the way it used to be. And have we made the changes that we need to continue to make and moving forward? So,
well, I think we're going to have to do some more podcasts on some new or some other topics. I know we've talked about maybe touching base on the LRS and that history, and maybe dive into some service dog stuff more. So we'll have to do some more.
I would love to. And I think one of the topics that I would be kind of neat to touch on sometime too is, how do we humans work as a group when we're training multiple animals? Because I think that it's a question that everywhere I go, you hear people go, what's your planning board like? And what are we going to do? And are we all on the same page? And how do we communicate? And how do I not have 5 people and I got a rebel in there that's trying to talk a different language to everybody else? And, I think it's a topic that needs to be addressed. As long as I've been in this industry, I keep on hearing the same things. You got to work with what it is you have in the restrictions you have, but it all needs to be the same for the animal. You, as the human, need to be able to recognize that. And you can do that if you're working your animals by yourself in your own home or whatever. But on the reality side of things, I don't think that we do a very good job all the time with that, because obviously it's either the managers, the supervisors, or your coworker, somebody in that group isn't on the same page, and everybody's trying to work a different direction, and the animal gets stuck in the middle, and you're wondering why the progress isn't being made. And it's really the reality. It's not the animal that's holding everybody back. It's usually the group dynamics that aren't. So
yeah, I like that topic.
Obviously I can talk all day long, Barbara, with all this kind of stuff. it's not that difficult, especially when we're talking about things that this industry. Always look forward to our chats and opportunities to corral Joe Lang in the corner and try to grab as much knowledge or ask him questions about things that are going on. But I'm also finding, and this is what's really been wonderful, especially about the behavioral analyst and the practitioner, is that I think that people put hierarchies on education, and well, they should at different times. But when you really take a look at the practical side of things, the practitioners know a lot about what's actually going on and how things are, and the animal analyst could sit back and take a look at it, and I can do the same thing, But the reality is, when you actually put your hands on that animal, there's that physical skill set, the mechanics, that if you don't practice those mechanics, I don't care who you are, you're just not going to keep up. And a lot of the analysts don't do that. They're very knowledgeable about it in the conversation, but you get them out there. And because as the practitioner, you're thinking about 150,000 things in 1 second, the analyst is going, I'm thinking about one thing or two things, and then how do those things go together? Or I'll just do it through some research to break those things down. So I really believe that anybody getting in an industry, if they can blend both those things together, is what's going to make them where they need to go in the industry. Because we wanted to do that for many years. I'm obviously stronger on the practicing side than I'm on the analyst side. But at the same time, we know enough to be dangerous. And I think that you see that when you're out.
I think what it does, in my experience, is this practical application element, which why it's so important is it gives us the tools to be the problem solvers, and having the science behind it just makes it that much more effective. So what I find when I'm on site consulting is it all just comes together like boom, 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 boom. You look at a situation and you go, oh, yep, I know what we need to do. We need to do this, 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 and this, and this. And it's because you've had so much practical application experience seeing those problems, and you're able to have the vision right in front of you of what you need to do.
And for you, because you're traveling so much with your consulting business, that you get a chance to practice problem solving all the time, which puts you into a problem solving view every time you walk into an environment. Because you probably can also see whether or not it's not necessarily the animals, but it's the people. So you can go ahead and target in your problem solving versus understanding it on that one behavioral aspect. Because as well as I do, every problem that you're solving has multiple pieces to it. It's not one element. And I think that's where the analyst will look at the one piece, and they need to have more exposure to the overall picture. And because you are practicing your mental mechanics for problem solving, gives you a better view of what it is you're seeing versus somebody who's kind of restricted to only being able to focus on one piece because that's the way they've been trained. You're a smart girl, Barbara.
Well, right back at you. Well, I have a feeling we could talk for another few hours if we let ourselves, and we might have to save that for the Art and Science of Animal Training conference over at the bar.
That sounds fine.
But speaking of, going back to you and April Becker, you guys are giving a presentation there. And I know the conference is sold out, but they may make your presentation available afterwards. So why don't you go ahead and share what the two of you are speaking on so that people know what to look for?
A lot of our conversation about what the cooperative hunting of the Harris hawks, what we can learn from it. And we've kind of touched a base on a lot of that. And what we want to be able to do is to be able to give some insight into the way that others can look at what we've learned from their cooperative hunting and how we've incorporated ourselves in the cooperative hunting. And then how you can take a look at that when working either with multiple animals at home or in zoos, and take a look at where you need to be investing your energies. And through the pieces that we found by working with the Harris hawks and us being involved in it, is how those two intertwine and how closely they are, that they're not segregated. They're actually one in the same. When the Harris hawks are interacting in their natural habitat and they're hunting, everybody picks up a different skill. One picks up a skill for pursuing, one for flushing, one for catching, one for sharing. They all develop, and I see it all the time while I'm out in, and we'll talk a little bit about that during the talk, is how at those particular moments they're able to switch what skill set they need to have when they're actually pursuing the game. And that doesn't change. If you've got 3 dogs and you want your dogs to go out individually, what do you need to do? You need to teach them what their name is. You need to individually teach them what it means to maybe sit there and while the door is opening and not running out. Those things need to be basics before you actually add in the other 2 dogs. And then when you bring in the other 2 dogs, you bring in one at a time, and you teach them to work together, and then you work them as a larger group. And Harris hawks naturally do that. They naturally pick those pieces. By getting out, you get a chance to see that. By getting them into the environment and being able to see the way they are naturally, the way they're able to switch gears, the way one is able to see game in the distance, and because those bells sound like he was telling you, when the other bird's looking the other direction, it just automatically pops off and goes, because that's an indicator. It's a cue that says, let's go together. And you can see even the way that they fly, that one knows where it's going, and the other one may be gaining a little bit of altitude to see maybe where it is, and then they clue into it, or they hold back and they wait for the first one to come in, and they may, because the potential of maybe them losing it, and the other one can then, if it's taking off to the right or left, the other one can make a decision to going in there. But those need to be made individually before they're made together. And when you're working with your dogs at home, or you're working with multiple animals in a zoological environment, those are things I think we have to realize, because we don't want to create followers. We want to create learners. And same mistake that I made with my 2 birds, assuming because they can make those decisions on their own. We couldn't individually hunt with one of the birds without them understanding what the baseline is. So the talk is basically, these birds have taught us so much because we've had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with them. On the behavioral analyst side, is one of the things that April's been doing when we were out flying is she wanted to see what it was like when one caught and one didn't, when they both caught, when they worked together as a team. So the environment helped us set up a lot of these situations so she could break down how we together, interlocking is a term that we'll talk a little bit about, which is basically about kind of uniting together in order to the humans and the animals together to be able to have a common purpose, interlocking, especially during the hunting. It's about how those things relate to each other, and how the Harris hawks kind of taught us more about that, because you have a greater exposure to allowing those things to happen. So when we were out and she was out, she's taking notes in the middle of the field on some of the different aspects that focused on that. And where I'm bringing myself into it is I'm the person being the experiment. I'm the one that's been doing this for a while, and she's kind of taking a look at what has made it successful, what has allowed us these opportunities to do it, and what have I learned by these guys working together, and how do we work together. And by bringing April in for her to be able to see that, these questions that you would normally ask about multiple animals working together, this particular species, the one that does hunt together in groups, helps us better identify what it is we can bring into the homes or zoological environments, and how to take a look at the species you're working with. And again, a lot of it comes down to a lot of the conversations that we've had today. I'm the practitioner, and I'm talking in Al's lingo, and she's going to go ahead and break it down a little bit, so it's in a little bit more of the analytical side of things on some of the approaches that we've done. And hopefully it brings together the analyst and the practitioner, which we've talked about. And we haven't, the conferences, we really haven't had an analyst and a practitioner talking together. We usually have, it's either the analyst or the practitioner segregated, and the practitioner is talking about what the analyst they've talked to said, or vice versa. We're kind of doing what I think is the perfect match, and I talk about this with the students all the time, is the practitioner of the future really has a background in behavioral analysis, because then they can take both those pieces together. So we're taking 2 separate brains and taking those 2 brains and kind of putting them together using a species that can help show us what's going on. And that's kind of what we want to, that's the thing that we'd like to present, is taking the the two brains making them one. I'm lucky that it's April because she has enough experience through some of the encounters she's had with you and the stuff she's been interested in, that when she's out with me, I don't have to sit and explain everything to her. But what ends up happening is when she's watching, she's asking me questions on why I did what I'm doing at that present time, and I can talk about it. She can then take and break it down a little bit more on how that particular situation can be analyzed. The practitioner and the analyst, putting them together, and that's what I'm excited about doing. I do like, I got to tell you, I do like presenting with other people because I like to hear other people's thoughts and ideas. But this one with her, I think, will be kind of exciting, at least for me, hopefully for the audience, is because we're bringing those two things together. Interesting enough, as bright, she's a PhD, she's a super bright woman, but to sit and have a conversation with her and the questions she's asking me, I'm realizing that I'm the expert. And even with all the invested time and energies and stuff that she's had over these times, when I'm hearing her ask me these questions, I'm going, I'm almost thinking that might be something you should know, but you wouldn't necessarily know that unless you practice it. Yeah, and that's not something she practices.
Yep, I agree. I think there's just, again, it goes back to the practical application part is really, really important. And what I appreciate about that conference is that the academics there really do value what the practical application people bring to the table. And so there's that lovely give and take between both communities. And that's what makes me love that conference so much.
Piece you just said, the thing I'm really thrilled about the presentation is for her to be able to express in her behavioral analytical mind, but also her interest as a practitioner. She's interested in that and how those two pieces work together. And I'm hoping on those outcomes of how all this kind of works out is that the takeaway is for the future. And the future is that combined person that looks at it both ways and doesn't look at just the laboratory, but looks at what they can learn from the laboratory and be able to be used in an actual setting, and that people feel comfortable with doing that. Because I think that in our world, we've always looked at the analyst as the PhDs and the brains. But when you really take it all down and you thread it down, they have a lot of this knowledge, but they don't have the practical experience that's being applied. That's actually super important. And if you can put both those pieces together into one person, you then change the dynamics of what you can actually do with these animals, and hopefully come up with brand new, incredible processes for what we can do to enrich the animals and condition the animals to what it is we're doing, because people are taking a different look at how that happens. Instead of breaking it down into one little small category, they're looking at it more broadly and how that one little piece intertwines, as we have a tendency to do, but we're not always doing something because the behavioral analyst told us. It's because through our experiences and our mechanics, we're doing it. And sometimes we need somebody else to explain why we do it, but it's so natural that if you could have that in one person, how exciting would that be?
I know, superpowers. That's the way I think about it. We can put it together. Yeah, I will definitely put a link to that conference, even though it is sold out. But if you get on their mailing list, they do have a waiting list if spaces open up. And also, if you're on their mailing list, you'll get notified if they make any of those presentations available after the event as something that you might be able to watch online after the event is over. So I don't know which presentations they'll make available, but perhaps it is yours, Al. So, and I'm presenting as well on cat and exotic animals. So definitely get on their mailing list. I think it's a great conference. And if you can't attend this year, hopefully next year. So Al, I think we probably should wrap it up because we could talk for hours and hours and hours. I want to thank you so much for sharing your passion. There has been so much solid gold in this conversation, and we're absolutely going to have to do it again. So thank you so much, Al.
Barbara, thank you. And I would love to hear when this goes out, some of the questions that others are talking about, because it helps me to better understand how to direct this information or future information, and what it is that people are actually interested in knowing more about, or what it is they find that's a little bit more controversial and why it might be. For me, I would like that kind of feedback, because it helps me to better understand some of the things I might take for granted that I need to maybe focus more attention on. So thank you, my friend, for allowing me an opportunity to be a part of your really successful consulting business, Miss Barbara.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Al Kordowski. I certainly did. As you can tell, we can talk forever and ever. There's so much to discuss about animal training, and Al is one of those great people who knows that the learning never stops, and that's why it's so much fun to talk to him every time I get a chance. As you can tell, the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference has already passed, and we had a great time. His paper with Dr. April Becker was fantastic, very sciencey and very art of animal training. So it was exactly as he described, the perfect combination of practical application and behavior analysis. And hopefully they will make that presentation available on their website. And that website is artandscienceofanimaltraining.org. You definitely want to visit that website because you also want to get your name on their mailing list so that you can be ready to sign up for the conference for next year. It's sold out so fast this year. And if you're on the mailing list, they're going to let you know when tickets get available so that you can get yours really quickly. And the dates for next year are February 20th through 21st. The conference is always held in Hurst, Texas, and that's right near the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so it's really convenient to the airport if you want to get in on that conference. I love that conference because it really stretches my brain. I always feel very inspired after I attend that conference, so get on that mailing list. Now, after listening to that podcast, if you have a question for Al, let me tell you how you can get in touch with him. There's a page on my website. If you go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com/smlinks, you will be able to submit a question there. Now, you can submit a question for me, but you can also submit one for Al there. Just make sure you let me know that that's one for Al Kordowski, and I'll make sure it gets to him. Speaking of questions, I've been trying to answer your questions on social media and here on the podcast that you submit to me through that page. And one that came in recently that I think is perfect for this particular podcast was about dominance. Somebody wants to know if dominance exists in the animal world and does it apply to different species that we work with as we're training them. Now, this is a really tricky question because a lot of people talk about dominance as a way to train animals, in particular when we talk about dogs, or in some cases when we talk about parrots, we hear this a lot. And dominance does exist in the sense that animals will compete over resources, and the animal that does tend to get access to all the resources can be considered dominant. So we do talk about that basically when we're talking about conspecifics, animals competing amongst each other. But we tend not to talk about that in terms of human relationships. At least animal trainers that I work with in the animal training community, we don't think about dominance as a strategy for influencing animal behavior. So when somebody says you need to dominate your dog, or you need to be the boss, or you need to be the pack leader, not really a strategy that I would consider, and definitely not something that I consider with birds. You might have heard somebody say if you're higher than a bird, that you're dominant over that bird. Doesn't really work that way. Actually, what's typically going on there is that birds tend to prefer to sit on higher perches for a number of reasons, mostly because it gives them lift for flight. So it's a good place to be so that you can take off quickly if you need to be catching an animal, for example, if you're a predatory bird, or if you need to take off into flight because you need to get away from something, if you're a bird that might need to escape something. So that's just a good strategy for taking off and getting lift. And what we often hear about in the parrot community is that people can't get a bird to step up onto their hand if the bird is up high. That has nothing to do with being dominant or not. It's just that it's more reinforcing for the bird to be sitting up on that high perch. And if you haven't trained the bird with positive reinforcement to step up onto your hand, then there's no value in stepping up onto your hand. So a lot of times what people tend to do is they tend to be coercive. They push into the bird's feet to try to get the bird to step up on their hand. And usually what happens, the bird either shows a fear response and moves away, or the bird may end up resorting to aggressive behavior to try to get the hand to go away. And then people will get even more coercive until eventually the bird steps up onto their hand. And then they think, well, if I'm dominant, then the bird will get on my hand if I'm more coercive. But in reality, if you train the bird with positive reinforcement, so it looks forward to stepping onto your hand, then it will get right onto your hand. Now, in that example, I'm talking about a bird that doesn't fly, that might have its flight feathers trimmed.
And the reason I'm saying that is because as someone who comes from a free-flighted bird show world, and as Al was talking about with free-flighted birds there, if you train them with positive reinforcement, it doesn't matter if they're way above your head. They look forward to coming to you. So it has nothing to do with dominance whatsoever. It's really about making it very reinforcing to come to you. So from my experience, I would say that dominance is not really about the human-animal relationship. It's more about competition over resources. That would be the definition that I would use, which really comes from a ethology kind of approach. And that's really something we see between conspecifics over resources. So that would be my approach on that. All right, if you have more questions for me, be sure to go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com/smlinks, and that's a great place where you can send me some more of those questions. Now, on a more serious note, right now is a really challenging time for people. Most of us are inside of our homes thanks to a little something called coronavirus. But you know what? We can turn this around. We can make this a positive experience because you know what? That's what animal trainers do. In fact, that's a lot of what my work is. When I go to facilities, a lot of my work is about problem solving and trying to take a situation that may not be successful for somebody and turning it into something that works. And that's how I'm looking at this situation right now. I'm looking at it as an opportunity for me to take time to work on some things that I've been putting off. And maybe that's what you can do too. Maybe it's permission for you to take time to train a behavior that you've been putting off for a while. Maybe it's time for you to take some courses you've been wanting to take. Maybe it's permission for you to take time to send in a question for me that you've been thinking about but just haven't had time to do. Maybe it's time to catch up on some podcasts, and maybe it's time to ramp up your education about animal training because now you've got a little bit more free time to do that. And to be honest, I've thought about how can I make that easier for all the people that I'm already working with. I wanted to make it a little easier for those of you that are not yet a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com to join us and learn more about animal training while you potentially have some time available to do so. So I've made a special code, and the code is COVID-19, and that will give you a 19% discount on your membership to the education program, where you can get access to some fantastic courses on animal training, everything from how to train a new behavior to setting up your animal training program to training husbandry behaviors, training medical behaviors, how to train your animal to shift reliably, how to study the science of behavior change if you want to get into all the sciencey stuff. I've even got that award-winning presentation on training animals for euthanasia. If you're working on training injections, there's so many resources inside the education program, and there's a lot more to come because I'm also grounded, and so I'm working on putting a lot new courses inside the education program. And it would be great to have you join us and learn more things as well, while you potentially are spending a bit more time at home isolating as well. And we've also got a great community, so lots of opportunity to talk with each other about animal training. This special coupon is only going to be good for a short period of time because I'm optimistic we're going to be out of this situation sooner than later. And all you need to do to use it is pick a membership option, and then where it says select payment method, right above that, you're going to see in green letters, have a coupon. You click on that, and that'll open up a box where you enter COVID-19, and then it will apply your 19% discount. So even though things are a little weird right now, we can turn this into something positive, and that's what I intend to do with it. So I hope you'll join me. There's a lot of great information for you inside animaltrainingfundamentals.com and a lot more exciting stuff to come down the road. I look forward to talking training with you on the next Animal Training Fundamentals podcast. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.